the awesome weather we have during the season. It's kind of fun to talk about this, because when something happens in your life where you're out of it for a year, one thing I said, I understand why people in the education take sabbaticals, because it allows you to kind of chill out a little bit and reassess your life. And really, over that time, I didn't get out of baseball. I was still involved in things. But from the coaching perspective, if you look at just personally what I've done in my career, I felt like I've done darn near everything. I can't check the box of the win the national championship. I haven't won a national championship yet. So for me, and where I was at 56 years old, grandbaby, if you've looked at my social media, you can see I'm kind of a proud grandfather. All of those things, I was comfortable in life. And so, but did I want to coach again? Absolutely. But it was going to have to be the right situation. And when you look at the University of Michigan, I was very familiar with this program. Certainly being a player back in the days when Bud Midall would bring the Barry Larkins in town at Miami University and kick our tail. My first collegiate start, ironically, on the mound was against Jim Abbott. So I've got all these vivid memories of playing them back as a player. And then as a coach, coaching against them in the Big Ten. Everybody knows, we never really wanted to say it, even when I was at my other school in the Big Ten, the Hoosier Land. This is a different beast here. And the national brand, the ability to realistically play for a national championship was very important to me, because if I was going to get out of the grandfather thing and doing that, it was going to have to fit on a lot of levels. And important to the baseball side of it, everybody talks about winning a national championship, but I think you have a realistic chance to do that here by the support that's given to the program. I think recent history speaks to that. On a personal level, just being familiar, no stranger to the Midwest, that's been the fun part for me, is getting back here and just that activation of the network and all the old friends that I've not really kept in contact with over the last 8 years of just being in a different spot geographically. So coming back in felt like, we could get up to speed pretty quickly. And then, the recent announcement, I think what's really cool, with the expansion of the league, bringing UCLA and USC in, I think that's going to be exciting. And when it comes down to it, you're going to want to be in, if you're coaching, you're going to want to be in one of these, 2 to maybe 3 conferences on a national level, if you realistically want to do the stuff that I just, aforementioned in my comments. So long answer, but it checked all the boxes. Maybe I should have started with that. Checked all the boxes. But I wanted to give you some context in it, because I think it's because I've heard everything. I've heard, didn't want to coach again, too old, blah blah blah. No, man, this is where I'm excited to be here. My family's excited to be here, and feel like we got a lot to offer. So excited to get going.
And Coach, when you were talking about recruiting and baggage, was able to pull some guys over to Clemson with them. Jimmy Overtop recently said he was coming back. Did you have a conversation with him, or how did that kind of go?
Well, so, ironically, just through what I've been doing the last year, Eric and I we were in contact with each other, honestly, 3-4 times a week. And this was pre all of this. So we were communicating. So believe it or not, the only team, this sounds crazy, the only team I really followed this year was University of Michigan. Seriously, I kind of stepped away from baseball, but I would always check the scores and follow when I could and watch the team, because he was coaching them. So I had a little bit of knowledge of what was going on, with the team, the personnel. The one thing that Eric said to me, right when I got the job, was, you're going to want to get Jimmy back. One of those deals. He's a key piece. Because I asked him, I said, what's the makeup and what are the deficiencies? What do we need? So I did. We spoke. He had let me know. Jimmy had let me know kind of his mindset in going into the draft and where his head was. But going back to what I referenced earlier, the Michigan education, he's like, Coach, it means something to me. If I don't get what I want in the draft, I'm coming back with enthusiasm. I'm not just going to sign and get out of here. That's what I think is so special about this place. And so he shared that with me, and he stuck to it, because he certainly could have signed. He certainly could have, entered the portal, which he did, and gone to anywhere in the country. But if it wasn't right for him, he wanted to be back here. So I thank him for his trust in that. And we've conversed since. So we're going to build around that young lad, for sure, from all that I've heard. Still haven't seen. But no, I'm excited.
You spoke a little bit about deficiencies in the team. One of them, notably this past season, was pitching. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I
Shame
think
on you for that.
it was at least over 6 ERA for the team this season. Coming into this year, fall ball, is pitching a top priority for you?
I don't think that formula changes anywhere or for really anybody. And I wouldn't say that it was unique to Michigan. I mean, I think it's highlighted because we're all here. That the pitching thing is something that's a hard nugget to solve in college baseball. The draft and the reduced draft and all of that stuff has made it really a commodity to grab some of the top arms. So, yeah, of course it's a priority. If you want to win, it's going to start on the mound, and you say that you're going to have good. You got to start with good pitching. And the formula has. I said this game's been around for a long time. If you pitch it well and you play defense and you get a timely hit, you're going to win a lot of baseball games. So, yeah, the obvious answer to that is yes. Pitching is going to be a priority for us. And but again, I can't sit here today and tell you what we're deficient. I will say this. It was really encouraging for me because I had the opportunity to see some summer league games, of which our guys are in right now, and some guys that didn't have great numbers. I'm like looking at them on the mound, going, "Oh my God!" And I talked to them. I'm like, "If you just do this right here, what you're doing, you're going to be fine next year." So even with those kids, and this is what we talked about in the first Zoom, I think there's enough talent here, and sometimes a fresh start is good, and whether someone goes somewhere else or there's a coaching change or whatever, because everybody's starting at ground zero. And I think just even that psychological piece of that is going to help some of the guys that are uber talented that maybe just the numbers didn't translate. So I'm excited to see how these guys within our system will translate onto the field. But pitching will always be a priority. So.
Obviously, you know this league well. Forget the UCLA thing you mentioned earlier. How have you seen the league evolve, improve here since you were at Indiana and now coming here to Michigan?
Well, I think, going back to my playing days, it was like Michigan and everybody else. I mean, clearly when Bud had it rolling here. Then there was a drop-off for a while, and I think a lot of that was just NCAA-wise, some of the legislation, you could say weather, all that stuff. But once, when we were in Indiana and kind of cracked that nut in 2013, I think that helped. But it was also the injection of I believe, the Big Ten network at that time, which allowed the conference not just to be regional, it was more national. And I think this is a strong conference. In fact, when I took the job from Indiana and went to the Pac-12, it was interesting because in the first meetings there, I was pointing out the fact that how much the Big Ten had advanced beyond the Pac-12. So this whole thing about weather and all that stuff, I said, well, that's not the narrative. It's really not true because you look at the number of teams the Big Ten at that time was getting in versus what the Pac-12 was getting in. I just think the investment the universities have made in it through the network, through the resources available, that we've said, hey, baseball is important for this conference. And you look at the facility, and I remember we brought a team up here when this was open. I think Rich Maloney was here. This thing, was the Taj Mahal. Now people are building them and people are investing in. And when you do that, I don't think it's a shock that this league is elevated. I think it's a good league. It's a strong league. Do we have a disadvantage of weather? Yes, maybe a little bit at the start. I think the thing that we have to solve on a national thing, and I believe this is going to be some discussions coming up at the Big Ten, is that how does that impact the RPI, which then impacts the accessibility to the NCAA postseason tournament. We've got to figure that out because I do think you look at Iowa this year, what happened to them. Was it Maryland? Rutgers. Rutgers. Yeah, it was Rutgers. That's unconscionable. I mean, I don't see how people can. I don't understand how that happened. And maybe there's more to it than I know. But we've got to get beyond that and truly give access, not through the hype. You understand where I'm going with that, but not through the hype of conferences and this. But let's look at the on-field, production. And if you do that, this is a really, really good conference. And I go back to, I think we played Michigan. Year we were 2020 was the best team that I think I've ever had. They kicked our tail out there. So Big Ten's good baseball, plain and simple.
Coaching wise, I think every team, every staff has an identity before they really start to roll things out for you guys and for your team. I know you don't want to show your hand too much maybe, but what kind of style do you think this team will have? And you guys are going to take an aggressive approach in the base path. That was a big thing for this team prior. So what kind of approach are you taking from a coaching standpoint as far as game strategy goes?
This is just answered this question not too long, just recently. I think it depends on your team. I think I make a mistake if I come into this and I'm saying, hey, we're going to be a home run hitting team. If you look at our teams, we've been predominantly power hitting teams. But if I lay back and play for the 3-run homer and I don't have guys that can hit it, that's a mistake on our part. So we would have to adjust our style of play to the personnel we have. I can't sit here today and give you a definitive answer on what our style of play or what our identity would be until I have a realistic assessment of what the personnel is. I could give you an idea of what I would want it to be, which, and this is what I just said to the gentleman with the interview I just did. You want to, I know how I feel in the dugout when the opposition, from an offensive standpoint, is sending a guy to the plate that can hit a double or a home run. That puts a little fear in you as a coach. You pitch them a little differently, you think a little differently. I would like to have a lineup that when we're sending those guys to play, there's 9 guys that put a little fear in that other dugout. Back to your question earlier about the pitching, and then if we can get it down to when we had it rolling at Indiana, and when you look at teams that really get it going, you can set a rotation and you can have roles within your pitching staff that if we can get it down to a 6-inning game, in other words, if we got to lead by 6, I know I've got this guy coming out of the pen, the game's over. That's what we would aspire to do is get it to that point. I just don't know yet until we get a fall under our belt to know exactly where we are. But that's where we will aspire and get to eventually. That's what we're going to do.
What is your approach to analytics and all the technology that is now part of this game?
My approach is that I think it has to be a blend. I truly do. I don't, and this really was key to me in the hiring process of making sure, because I guess if you're going to say, what are you, I'm old school, but I'm not old school enough to realize that if you get stuck in old school, then you're in trouble, because it is the world that we live in today. I think for us at the collegiate level, it is a great teaching tool. The problem with analytics, and when people lean too heavily on it, in my opinion, is we use it to cover up the deficiencies in either knowledge or coaching or whatever, that, hey, your spin rate's this, therefore you should be this. Well, if they don't understand how to do that, then what good is the data? So if they can't handle it. So I think to me, it's a blend of using it to teach, to educate, also from a recruiting perspective. If you go into it and say, we're not going to do that when these guys have been brought up in it, that's a mistake. So I'm a realist on that. I don't want to do something just to be doing it for recruiting. It has to have a benefit. I think there's a benefit in it. To use it to teach, to facilitate, or to support what the eyes are seeing, to validate sometimes, or to get a kid to understand. But I'm not over committed to the data analytics, and I'm not also saying that we're not going to use it. I think there's a blend in there. And again, I think each kid responds to teaching and learning differently. Some kids will understand and that'll make more sense to them. Some kids, like, hey man, just give me the ball, let me go get somebody out. So when I referenced to the hiring piece, that was really important to me when identifying a pitching coach, that, because I was listening with my ears, are you saying you don't ever want to use it, or is it a blend? And when I kept hearing the theme of blend, that was very important to me, because I think that's the world that we live in. Same thing, and we'll get to the offensive, and I'm not finished hiring yet, but we'll make those announcements soon. But again, you probably get a sense of me. I talk longer on your answer, but I think it has to be a blend. We can't ignore it. And if you look at professional baseball, there was this rush to do that. I think they've kind of reeled it back in a little bit and realized, hey, we're dealing with human beings here. You still have to have somebody that can connect to these kids too. So we're going to use it, but we're going to use it, I think, in a more strategic way. So
I'd love to get more of a sense of, or what the year off was like for you, and did you discover any new hobbies? Was there a moment that you realized, I really miss baseball at all? Is there any one moment like that?
Well, I'm a Netflix junkie, so what it was, and I say this, like, our profession, and I'm not going to use it specifically about me, I'll just say coaches in general. Like, coaches in general, our profession is judged publicly. I mean, we sign up for that. And no, I'll say it. My last few years at Arizona State were interesting to me. I'll just leave it at that. And so it was good for me to take a year and just really kind of take a deep breath, because I felt like I got away from, because of the circumstances there, I got away from really the core of who I was, which is enjoying, relationships with kids and the on field, the everyday and whatever, where I was so focused on these other things. And so it was good for me just to take a step back. And then it was probably the initial reaction in the first month was like, okay, get your body back to normal, get breathing normally again, enjoy just having a cup of coffee in the morning. Then it got to, okay, now where's baseball fit in this? You've done a lot in what you're doing. And then, so that was probably month 3 or 4. I was still doing stuff in baseball in another venture. And then it was probably about, maybe it was the coincided with the start of the baseball season. It's like, geez, man, I really miss, I miss this again, the competition and getting out there in the field. So it kind of evolved, but I'll say this, and I'll say it openly, and I've said it openly, I don't want to be misinterpreted. I was good doing that. It goes back to, again, I think the strength of this place. It was going to have to, for me, have to take a special situation and a special opportunity to get back into it, because I know now everything that goes into what makes it successful if you pour your heart and soul into this thing. So for me, this, again, I make it sound like I'm not different from anybody else, but it's like, for me personally, it was, if I were going to do that again, it was going to have to align on a lot. And I talked to Rob about this in the interview process. It was going to have to align on a lot of different levels, because I wanted to make sure I was getting back in and doing it for the right reason. And that, again, goes back to relationships with the kids, and this game's supposed to be fun. So if I'm not having fun coaching every day, and our kids aren't having fun, and winning is fun, don't get me wrong, then why would I want to do that when I can be watching Breaking Bad and holding my grandson? So that was
teaching him the classics.
You guys will see Maverick at some point. I'm gonna say it. You will see him at some point. He's something.
You mentioned an interesting time at your previous position. Is there any lesson that you took from that has maybe changed you over this past year?
Not really, other than, outside noise. I think sometimes is just noise. It's one of those things where, I just said this actually to a recruit, nothing really changes in this life, whether it's sports, your job, I don't care, it's people. It's like, so it's the people you're dealing with on an everyday basis. So if you're not aligned with those people, and that, for our world, it's the kids in the locker room, it's the support staff, it's your administration. If you're not aligned with that, the formula is probably not going to work. And so back to the decision on me to coach again and get back in at a place like this is like, that part had to be there. And that was the part that on this end, that, say at 56 years old, the due diligence was done on that. It's not the money, it's not the whatever, it's not the status of coaching. It's like, am I going to enjoy waking up every day, going to work? And if I'm being truthful, that got a little different at the end. But that's this profession. So you'll get a sense of me when we do things like this. You're going to get the authentic, the real me. Do we do things differently? Yeah. Do I do things differently than Eric and him? Yeah, we're going to. Is he right? Am I right? Am I wrong? I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, we're all trying to make kids better people. We're trying to win baseball games in the field. And as long as we're staying down that path and that lane, good things are going to come out of it. And that's a win. And, if you're chasing, public approval or fan approval or whatever, then you're going to be chasing that stuff to the end of time. It's just not worth it. So focus on what we have in front of you. So for me, I can tell you that's what I'm so excited to get back into that and just like put my attention and focus on that and have some fun doing this. So.
Have you met Carol? I know you haven't been here that much. Carol Hutchins, and how important is it to have a softball baseball?
I want to give you a useless trivia piece of information. I had met Carol. I'm trying to think, 20 years ago. When was 20 years ago? 10 years? About 20 years ago, I interviewed for this job. Back when Rich Maloney got it. So I got my silver medal way back when. But I met Carol. I met Hutch way back when on that interview process, and she actually stopped in. I reminded her of that, and this is typical Hutch fashion. I said, I met you many years ago in an interview. And she said, well, the only guy I remember on there was some guy from Kansas or something like that. I was like, well, thank you. I must have made a great impression on you. You know? But she's great. I think we're kind of neighbors or something. So we're going to spend a lot of time together. So she's great. And I know she's done a phenomenal job. And when I was saying I followed programs, I actually followed their program too. So.
Do you think, should there be like a working relationship between
she's
baseball
I mean,
and
she
softball?
can, yes, for sure. I mean, any of that stuff, if we're not learning from each other, then what are we doing? I mean, that's the thing, quite frankly, that going back to the decision, I missed that element in my last job. Just geographically, we were spread out. There wasn't a lot of interaction between coaches, even in a social setting. So I'm excited about that, just to be hanging around with college. We're at a world-class institution, so why should we not be learning with each other and different stuff on and off the field? Like, those relationships are valuable to me. But she's already said, we're gonna come over and learn from you, and I've said, we're gonna learn from you, and so absolutely, it's gonna be fun.
How many roster spots are you looking to fill for 22, and any idea on what positions that's gonna have to be?
Let's see. Well, I think, I've said this, like, I'm not a fan of like huge rosters in general, but we'll probably be at 35. We're not there yet. I don't know if we'll get, you know, I don't know what it's going to be this year until we have it go through that fall and assess. The one thing I'm not into, this is just me, like, everyone has to contribute, and that be whether it's the coaches, the staff, or whatever. If you're going to be in an organization, you have to contribute. Now, that's not hitting a 3-run. Doesn't mean you have to hit a 3-run homer or be the Friday guy or something. But if you can contribute and help our organization win, then there's a spot for you in our organization. So whether that number is 35 or 30 or 20, I don't know yet. I just don't know what our composition of the roster is yet. So
Roster-wise, like thinking about that number and all that, is that more of like we can spread out our 11.7 a little more evenly by having 30 rather than 35, or is that more of a philosophical thing where you want to have less cooks in the kitchen?
Yeah, it's probably more of the latter. It's just, this is a hard game, you know, and it's hard to be successul. And if you don't have, and it goes back to me, if you don't have everybody, you know, I know everybody uses that amount, rowing in the same direction, it's really hard to win. So like, if that's 35 guys that are all contributing and winning and a part of the team concept, then we'll keep 35 guys. If that's only 30, then it'll be 30. And everybody contributed in a different way. Not everybody has to be a starter. You've got to have depth, but I'm more about philosophically for me is like, are we all on the same page? Because if and when we win this thing, it's not going to be just the people in the locker room, and I've said this, it's going to be everybody. It's going to be the grounds crew. It's going to be the administrators. It's going to be the wait staff. That is what it takes to win a championship. So our roster piece to me is only one small part of the formula for success of this program. And it's a little, you know, it's the 4th time that I've come in, you know, into a program and taken it over on a transition, if you will. It takes about a year to kind of figure out, you know, is everybody in, or they not in? And the beauty of this, and I mean this now, everybody's at ground zero. And for some guys, that could be a bad thing because maybe they're playing because of their reputation of what they've done. For some guys, that could be a great thing because maybe they've been labeled as a non-this or a non-that, and now you get a fresh set of eyes. And I've seen it both ways. So I'm excited about that piece, and I think our guys are too. But I would anticipate we're probably going to be between 32 and 35. That's my guess.
You spoke about the hiring process early on. Speaking with Backage this past year, when the job opened up, when were you first contacted? How did that process play out? And was there ever a point where, you know, it might go to another guy, it might go to this guy? How did that play out for you?
Well, there's always someone reaches out, would you be interested? And then that kind of kicks the process and dialogue. I would say with any job, you know, there's nothing, you know, I've never talked to somebody who walks out of an interview and says, boy, I just was terrible on that. I don't feel good about it. Everybody walks out of it going, boy, I feel really good about it. And then you get a call later, hey, we went another direction. Oh, so again, I was always like, I felt like things were good. I felt like we aligned. But until you actually get the offer, you don't know. But I will say this on that. I was at a point, I don't want this to be misinterpreted, but I'm going to say it. I was good either, like, you know, and that's a great spot to be in life, because you're not taking a job out of desperation, you're taking it for all the right reasons. So I really, really wanted this, but if Rob had called me and said we've gone another direction, I would have cussed at him at first, and then, no, I would have said, hey, they've got their reasons for choosing somebody else, but life's good for Tracy Smith, we're good. I would have been disappointed, but that's kind of how, you know, that's how it works. I guess you just get a little bit older. You know, you're doing, when you're in a position of comfort, not desperation, it's a great spot to be in, just because then it's, to me, it's authentic and real. And so those dialogue happened, I don't know, I mean, it was probably a week or so, I don't know, a week, it's hard, I do remember that we finally got the thing official date, it was after the portal closed, which was, you know, but, you know, at that point it was like, you know what, we're gonna do this. And what I loved was the vibe and the message from the university was, hey, we understand what's happening here, we understand the timing, you know, we're gonna lock arms and go get this thing together, so.
When you talked with the team over Zoom, was there any conversation of team goals or just goals in general that you were looking for?
It was honestly, it was pretty quick, and that's all we've met. Once is over Zoom, and we've had separate conversations, but no, I was actually traveling in California and had to pull off and find a hotel that had Wi-Fi. But just kind of an introductory, and said similar to what I was saying earlier about the rosters, hey, it's a fresh start for everybody, which could be a great thing. And I'm all about opportunity. Like, for me, the only thing Michigan should and will promise guys move is an opportunity to compete and get better every day. Outside of that, you know, we'll do our best to develop and everything, but it's on them. You're going to determine how many innings you pitch, how many innings how many at bats you get. That stuff is on you. So that was really the gist of that. We really haven't had, because the draft hadn't happened yet. There were still numerous guys in the portal at that time. Juggling a lot of balls at that point. I would say truthfully, from the time this process started, which was maybe a month or so ago, or a month ago, I don't even know, only probably the last 2 or 3 days, and we're still a lot of stuff to do, but only the last 2 or 3 days do you feel like you can go, because the just stabilizing the recruiting, which was the first question. We feel like we finally have done a little bit of that, and now we can start playing some offense.